Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of ReWild My Bio. I am your host, Shawn Slade. Thanks for joining me today to discuss all things on how to become your own meteorologist. I'm actually also going to share some turkey hunting stories that I just experienced up on my land, and had a lot of fun doing that, so I have to share that rewilding adventure with all of you. But I want to ask a question. Are you just like me and you're, tired of looking at that weather app to prepare for an outdoor adventure, only to have what you're being told on the screen to be the exact opposite of what is actually happening outside in 3D reality? I'm thinking of, we're going to get into some old wives' tales today. And I'm thinking it's an old joke, but it belongs right there with all these truisms, I'll say, around, the Farmer's Almanac and how to predict the weather. And that is, meteorologists are the only people who can be wrong all the time and still have a job. And actually, do you want to know what I think? I think they're wrong with the weather forecasts purposefully so that they can see how much, they can get away with in regards to how many false or inaccurate statements the news can make and still get people tuning in. I know I sound like a crazy conspiracy theorist, don't I? But, well, at least I'm not talking about chemtrails, I guess I could say. But perhaps I should be for this episode. But I digress, because I believe today's topic is not only important, but it's a fun way that we can interact with the natural world. And honestly, right now I'm thinking of the storms that have recently occurred in the southern United States with tornadoes, and it kind of calls to mind the importance of knowing how to read the elements in different landscapes that, we might be interacting in. So I think of, learning our local landscape and practicing, these skills we're going to chat about today in nearby nature. Then we can bring these skills into the wilderness, or when we go on an adventure or a vacation in a natural setting that might be foreign to us, right? So learning how to predict the weather through observing nature signs, and also something we're going to be chatting about today is how to follow our intuition. So how to follow and how to sharpen our intuition. And I believe this is a worthy topic, to say the least. So please stick around to the end, and you can find everything we're going to be chatting about today in the show notes over at rewildmybio.com/how to predict the weather. Enjoy the show. Now, before we dive into today's show, I wanted to touch on one thing that is super important for our health, and that is sleep. Did you know that there's one phase of sleep that almost everyone fails to get enough of? And this one phase of sleep is responsible for most of your body's daily rejuvenation, repair, controlling hunger and weight loss hormones, boosting energy, and so much more. And I'm talking about deep sleep. Now, deep sleep is something that I actually have a hard time getting a lot of. Sometimes I'm getting around 5 to 7% of my night sleep phases in deep sleep. And if you don't get enough deep sleep, you'll probably always struggle with things like cravings, slow metabolism, premature aging even, or even worse conditions. And why don't most people get enough of this important phase of sleep? And a big reason for that is because of magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is actually deficient in magnesium. And now magnesium increases GABA in the brain, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level. This is critical for sleep. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response system. Those with magnesium deficiency usually have higher anxiety and stress levels, which also negatively impacts sleep. Now, before you go out and buy any magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most magnesium products out there are either synthetic, or they only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium in them, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend a product by my friends over at BioOptimizers. They created this product called Magnesium Breakthrough. And taking this magnesium before bed helps you relax and wake up refreshed and feeling energized. The deep sleep benefits are actually noticeable, and I will say that from firsthand experience. I also love the BioOptimizers offers free shipping on select orders, and they also offer a 365-day money-back guarantee on all their products. Plus, they have a customer satisfaction rating of 99.3%. Impressive stuff indeed. So you can get 10% off Magnesium Breakthrough It's the best aid I know of for boosting deep sleep. And you can get that over at biooptimizers.com/rewildmybio. And be sure to use the code rewildmybio for 10% off at checkout. So again, that's BIOPTIMIZERS.com/rewildmybio. Enjoy. Welcome to ReWild My Bio, a self-help and alternative health podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Slade. Join me as I share stories, science, and strategies to help you rewild your biology and redefine your biography. So, as an entry in my rewilding and naturalist lifestyle biography, I'm going to share a story of a recent turkey hunt that was successful and rewarding in all sorts of ways. And that recently occurred 4 days up on my land, which I have the gift of stewarding and caretaking and really just connecting with. It's been the amount of turkeys up there and just being able to interact with this creature and the whole experience those 4 days have given me a new perspective and just a deep love and admiration for these magical, mystical birds. It was honestly, it was a lot of fun, and I got to do some hunting with my brother, which was great. And so he came up for a couple days, and we did some other things as well, as like getting drywall ready. Because if you don't know, I am currently in the process of building a home on this this beautiful piece of land up in the Canadian Shield, and this being future home of all things workshop and home base for the podcast, and the farming and all things that I'm looking to bring to life in the world of plant medicine through this e-commerce site, which I've mentioned before in the podcast. But if you're new to the podcast, then that's a quick update. But anyway, so that's the setting. Anyways, it's up there, and as I mentioned, the turkeys are plentiful. It's kind of funny because I moved up to that neck of the woods, as I mentioned, for farming. The other part would be to hunt more, right? Or to have a piece of property where I could hopefully hunt white-tailed deer. And the funny thing is that it seems like both those things are not necessarily, that area is not necessarily the best for those things. So one, farming, I'm in like a zone 3-4 right underneath Algonquin Provincial Park, right? So very cold, again, rocky, as I mentioned, the Canadian Shield being full of rocks. So when it comes to farming, it's just different, I guess I should say, than what I'm used to in southwestern Ontario in like a zone 6 and 7, right? So anyways, it's so it's just different in that regard. And then with whitetail hunting, whitetail deer are very scarce, at least in this neck of the woods. You have to get deeper into the backcountry, into the Crown land and whatnot, to find some of these white-tailed deer, which are there. But of course, moose being in the area, elk also in the area. So this area isn't necessarily managed for white-tailed deer. Not to say they're not there. It's just sometimes you'd have a better time spotting an elk, which are also kind of scarce when it comes to Eastern Ontario. Despite the elk being actually released, I believe in 2012, by the Ministry of Natural Resources here in Ontario, and I believe, and they were released maybe about 20 kilometers or 20 minutes or so away from this property. So anyways, white-tailed deer scarce, so turkey being just abundant up there. And again, me coming from Carolinian forest, southwestern Ontario, with predominantly big ag fields, right? So your corn and soy and wheat and what have you. Turkeys, white-tailed deer being everywhere. So when I moved up there, I was kind of surprised to see how well turkey are doing up there. And I mean, a reason why I wanted to mention this is partly from a conservation standpoint. When looking at hunting turkey in southwestern Ontario, a lot of talk amongst hunters and conservationists that turkey populations, not only in southwestern Ontario, but even throughout parts of the United States, are lower in areas where they, were introduced and have been thriving for some time. So up there in the Canadian Shield, it seems to be opposite. Just turkeys again everywhere, and large mature birds, toms, gobbling off the roost, and just honestly, it's just trophy turkey country in the sense of just trophy, like the landscape itself just being, for me anyways, again, hunting in Carolinian forest and being able to go up and hunt where, black bears could be curious as to your call, or wolves for that matter, or other critters. Not to say that happened or I was, concerned about that, but that said, the bears are up and out of their dens, and they're roaming around. So it was just amazing to be up there in that landscape and having, things like loons in the morning doing a mating call, which is something, if you've never ever heard a loon's mating call, it's quite majestic, and just beautiful, awesome. I guess nature connection time for me. Not really having much to look forward to as far as adventures or backcountry trips planned right now, as I'm working on finishing up my PhD dissertation. So to have this kind of in my calendar, it was I was looking forward to it, and it was very beneficial as far as just some quiet time and sitting at the base of a tree, what have you. But as for the hunts themselves, if you're looking for the hunting story, I mean, lots of exciting, action-packed stories. I probably, bear crawled good 300 yards at least, and it was just, I think, like turkeys can be frustrating when you're hunting turkeys, calling to them, moving. It's that should I move? Should I stay? Should we call? Should we use decoys? So these turkeys are seeing as in my neighborhood, there is some farm field in throughout this obviously dense forest up there in eastern Canada, or eastern Ontario rather. And so this area having grass fields and rolling hills and whatnot, you can expect turkeys to be out there throughout the day where they can see and feel comfortable. So we were basically blind hunting the first day, and didn't have any. Me and my brother were both sitting and hoping to see two toms that have been kind of showing up on my trail cameras. Hope to have them show up. They kind of did what old toms do and kind of hung up when they didn't see something they didn't like, so they didn't come in. So anyways, the end of that day, seeing as it was, I've never been successful at killing a turkey before. Two jakes came in, and a older jake, or a more mature jake, I guess, that I ended up shooting. And so that was fun and exciting, because my gun had actually misfired or didn't fire at all. So I was without a gun, so I grabbed my brother's gun to do the job. And that gun being out of whack was kind of a little, it was my uncle's gun, and my uncle, essentially got me into hunting, and my uncle has since passed away. So I have his turkey hunting shotgun. And so I'm thinking that was a little bit of a sign from him as to check this gun out. I didn't check the gun out, however. And then the next day, basically shot at a large tom and completely missed this bird. And I don't know how it happened. But anyways, the next day when I finally killed my tom, before shooting that bird, I had realized that the sights on my shotgun were off. So the beads were not lined up essentially. And so that's kind of one, it was nice to know that, it was a clean miss. Took that off my conscience anyways, that, it wasn't something that I did, because I was, you go from these highs to these lows, right, with turkey hunting, and the goal is to obviously just accept it and learn from it. So when I actually got to see that my gun was off, that was somewhat of a relief anyway. So, but anyways, I still was able to, that bird was probably 10 yards. So the sights, once I realized that, I didn't necessarily need them, and was able to kill that bird. So I was able to tag out up there on the land, and felt really good to do that, because as I mentioned, first birds, 5 years in the making. Having hunted turkeys actually for some time with a bow. I think of the 5 years, maybe 2 or 3 of those were with a bow, and then just never really getting a lot of turkey hunting time in the woods since I've had my gun license. So the shotgun being the tool of choice here. And yeah, just amazing birds, amazing experience. Again, just like as I mentioned, just like it's the quiet sitting there at the base of a tree, waking up with the natural world, and at the same time that natural movement. And even when I shot at that bird, obviously I made sure I didn't hit the bird, so I'm climbing through brush where I normally wouldn't be, and getting low, looking under things, and so yeah, just a lot of physical activity and movement, and a lot of gifted with this beautiful meat, which has been awesome. And if things like I'm thinking things that I've already made out of it, wonderful stock out of the bird, both birds rather, and then this stuffed turkey breast that I ate and made and ate, just wow, delicious. So things like that, and I'm a much better cook than I am a hunter, that's for sure. So when it comes to fully paying my respect to this animal on the plate, it's there's no corners cut, I guess, in the process. And I was just grateful to bring this home, and it's something to share with my partner, who she likes that white meat, turkey breast. She prefers that. And so, yeah, just to be able to have that and share that. And the dark meat also, I think anyone who throws out turkey dark meat, I think there should be a rule against that. A little bit of time in a slow cooker, and made some tacos out of that dark meat, and just beautiful, awesome meat. Just picking, obviously taking care to pick the tendons or the bones out of that, once before you kind of pull it apart. I think that's important. So, but yeah, delicious meat. So that's turkey hunting, and it was something I'm looking forward to do next year. And then whether it's with family or friends who are looking to get out there and have a really good turkey hunting experience, to share that with them, because looking at turkeys there, it's just plentiful. They are indeed. So great times. And if you've been turkey hunting and you enjoy turkey hunting, or you are someone who might be interested in having that experience, then hit me up through the website, or through Shawn at rewildmybio.com. Because I think the idea for me anyways, in creating workshops, having opportunities for people to hunt is, I think, would be an amazing thing. So how to work that out is something I'm still keen on learning as to what people might be interested in. So the topic at hand for today is how to use nature sign and clues from observing the elements to predict the weather. So yes, after today's episode, you will be able to be your own meteorologist. You can throw out the apps. Not exactly. This practice, it takes time. It's honestly, it's a forgotten skill. And it's one that I've been keen on enhancing, or should I say, it's a part of myself that I've been keen on reawakening, because I believe this to be a ancient part of ourselves. It is deep within our DNA to know how to predict and tell the weather, and basically decide all the things that we need to decide on from, knowing the weather in the day, right? It's an important thing to know. So, make no mistake, this process doesn't happen overnight. It truly is a process of what I would say is like a deep remembering, and it's a process of becoming more closely tuned into the subtle energies of nature, and of course the subtle energies of our own body, right? So cluing in, observing nature, but also cluing into ourselves and trusting our intuition, right? So we can, through doing this, it's not only about being able to tell what the weather is doing, right? We can tell what plants are edible, how to find water, how to find food, how to navigate throughout the landscape, to reach our destination. And in those times that, say we can't predict the weather, through the same, process of deep remembering these skills, we can control things like our body functions, right? So, and this is all just with our focus and with our attention. Now, if this sounds a little woo-woo for you, then I ask you obviously with this podcast, as always, to remain open-minded. And I mean, for example, just look at some of the amazing stuff someone like Wim Hof can do. It's come to mind right now, right? With body control. So these are, skills through like breathing and cold exposure. You can control body temperature, right? Same thing goes here when it comes to interacting with the natural landscape. We can, through focused attention and our attention and intention, we can do amazing things. So I'll also be going through, so not just touching on this intuitive side or this deep remembering side of things. We're also going to be going through practical skills, like how to predict the weather. So like what changing pressure means, and some of those common phrases that we've all heard about the weather. I'm sure we've all heard those, old wives' tales, as they're known as. So I'll also be talking about how, things like a sit spot and a weather journal could just be, one of the best ways to improve your meteorologist skills. So the primal self, we're going to start there with this intuitive side of the coin. So the primal self, it's a part of ourselves. It's a part of our psyche or our soul. And I think of it as those parts of our ancient DNA that are stored in, they're stored in our psyche. They're stored in the ethereal or in the soul. And, this is going back from those times as the great ape throughout history, right? So in these times, there is this remembering that our DNA has. And this isn't a physical part of our body, like say our brain or our heart or what have you. It's more so, think of it, let's say it is essentially a frequency that we can tune into. And through tuning into this level of awareness, through focused attention and intention, we can receive knowledge, right? So it is a part of us, and we can access it through, our felt sensations, through intuition, right? So once we've tuned into this, we're using certain cues to know this language in this world, right? Because we're not communicating with nature necessarily through what we're not through the English language. Whether we put words to it after is another thing, but this is just like any other sense. This is a sensorial part of our consciousness. So this is not the thinking or left brain kind of stuff. So we remember everything. We remember all of these skills, but much of these ancient skills, they take a quiet mind, free of clutter and all the modern day noise, I'll say, that we deal with, when we're in the matrix, when we're in the day-to-day, if we're in the urban environment, if we're around a lot of, built environment and human-made noise, then I find it makes it more difficult to achieve this. Now, I think with practice, you can get a monk kind of meditating in the middle of on the busy subway and reaching amazing, states of consciousness, right? So I'll say this, like if you're keen on learning more about this, like I'm kind of getting into this aspect of, the mind and consciousness, and you're probably wondering, like, Shawn, what are you talking about? Where did you hear this? So when I say this is a part of our self, this primal self is a part of our soul, or, part of our self. This is something I've learned through my teacher, who spent years and years studying the ways of grandfather stalking wolf through a New Jersey school, Tom Brown Jr.'s tracker school, which I've mentioned here before on the podcast. And, some of this curriculum I'm creating for the Nature Academy will be a mismatch of these teachings that I've got from my teacher. And, it's and of course things that I've applied in the past with, my life coaching, holistic life coaching clients and what have you. But what I'm mentioning is ultimately a part of the grander spiritual philosophy. So I do want to kind of pay credit and I'll put that in the show notes. Because today's, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of all the different realms of the self, but this is something, again, this aspect that we're focusing on today is the primal self. So, and I should actually just pause and say, if you are keen on learning more, in a formal setting, and I've said this once already here today, but contact me by emailing me at Shawn@rewildmybio.com. I hope to be getting a lot more questionnaires out and interest, or just to see what people are interested in learning in these types of nature connection courses that I'm going to be offering. So, again, everything in the show notes, if you're looking for, I'll put a link to Tom Brown Jr. School. If you aren't familiar with that, you can check it out. I'll put that again in the show notes at rewildmybio.com/how to predict the weather. fact, while I think about it, that's one other thing that I was wanting to put in the show notes is a few books from Carl Jung about the fusion of nature with our psyche. So if you're someone who, might think this is just a little weird and woo-woo before we get to the actual practical things or those, tested farmer's almanac, observations of nature. Yeah, I'd say the Carl Jung stuff that I'd like to mention anyways, it's just, looking at how through dream work we can access these ancient parts of ourselves. So this isn't just woo-woo spiritual nonsense. These are, again, tested psychological, practices and things that we can do through connecting with nature to access this. So let's briefly discuss how to achieve, I think where to go with this is how to achieve this state of being or consciousness before I get into some of those practical tips about reading nature sign. In order to harness this ability, this part of ourself, we need to go there. We need to tune into that part of ourselves. And what I mean by going there is I would say meditate, right? So setting the intention, so quieting your mind, setting the intention that you would like to access this part of yourself purely on the idea of saying, I want to go there. That is your intention. So set the intention and then totally quiet your mind and go into a meditation, whatever meditation process seems to work for you, but something where you're essentially trying to quiet your mind and receive a message as to what you're asking for. And I think this is the most important part, which, something I still always wrestle with is trusting what you get. You have to trust what you get when you are meditating and, setting these intentions. You can't necessarily change it. No, I don't like that, right? It's what you get is what you get. And I think by meditating and, setting this intention, going there, we're strengthening this muscle or this ability, right? It's like if you've done mindfulness meditation before, or say you haven't, say just connecting with nature is your thing. So that expansive sense of self that we get when we're in a quiet, comfortable, non-threatening, natural environment, that state of being is essentially the state that we need to go to. So by asking that question, saying, I want to access my primal self, that would be the first part. And that's just getting familiar with what that part of yourself feels like, what it feels like when you get a message, in that state of being, right? So in that frequency, because without knowing what that feels like, you're not going to be able to really understand, what you're getting. And, or even from there, you're not even necessarily able to say, ask those questions, those other important questions that we might want to ask, like, is this plant edible, right? Or in regards to the weather, is a storm coming? How do I need to prepare? What do I need to dress, right? So we can ask those specific questions once we've accessed this part of ourselves. So, and there's again, I've mentioned about what would you be interested in knowing, and I see there's, context in a little bit of stuff that I'm skipping over here in regards to saying go there, but meditating and setting intention is a good place to start with specifically this, because I think this paired with the observation and a little bit of knowledge on observation and what to look for, and then trusting your intention, it's just a way to practice this, right? So there's no right or wrong way to do this. So me skipping over aspects of these aspects of ourselves and how to go there, I would just say get into those states where you're quieting your mind, right? And then other than quieting your mind, let's say how about whether you do that or not, mindfully engaging with nature would be another way to go there and to access this, right? So by mindfully engaging with nature, ideally we're going into nature quietly, we're going into nature slowly, with an openness to whatever maybe arises, and we're going, conscious of our breathing and just aware of ourself, I guess, right? And how we're interacting. So we're going in a sense that we're trying to, pay respect or in a respectful way into the forest. I find by doing that and mindfully engaging with our senses, we can really start to quiet our mind and, again, kind of access these other parts of ourselves. So again, if meditating is not your bag, or you're one to more so go into nature, we'll go into nature and start using that sixth sense that you feel. If you've ever had the draw or the pull to a certain tree or a certain plant, that's that sixth sense kind of pulling towards you. And you might feel that in your chest, you might feel that in your hands, you might get a vision or a word even to say, come this way, right? So mindfully engaging with nature and following that, using your intuition, it's a great way to kind of reawaken this primal self. Another way would be to make it a game. Play, I'm thinking of making it an adventure. Go out into nature with that adventure mindset, or that child's eye, right? And go into nature with a sense of play, and make that your purpose, just to have fun, right? Walk through the forest quietly, or jump from log to log, get low, get your hands dirty. Think of things that you would have maybe done in nature as a kid, and essentially do that, right? And do that for a period of time, and that will get you into somewhat of a flow state, get you out of your head, so to speak, right? Out of the left brain into that more felt awareness state. And by doing all these three things, we're really able to, I guess, set an intention and receive information. And if we're tuned into that subtle energy rather than that constant story we might be telling ourselves, or the to-do list, if we can tune into that subtle energy, we can start to ask those questions in that frequency, and then we'll know when we get an answer, right? So in regards to weather, we could ask lots of different questions, right? Like, I'm heading out for a walk, right? So one easy way to do this, let's say if we've meditated, or we're engaging our sixth sense in nature, or we're playing in nature often, then let's say we want to know what the weather's going to be like. Well, one, like I said before, don't use the app. Walk outside, put your hand out. You can tell what nature or what the weather is like right now. But if you want to know what is to come, ask that question, go to that place, go to that feeling or that state of consciousness, right? That sense of oneness, or whatever that feeling, that primal self feeling feels like to you. Feel that, go there, and then essentially ask the question, like, what is, and I guess the question is an important part to ask, because you want to ask what you're actually looking for. So be specific with your question. That's a tricky part. But, what is the weather going to be like this afternoon? Or should I, or, is it going to rain? Asking specific questions like that, and then just waiting and feeling, right? Seeing what comes. Now you couple this with, sure, looking at the app, because we're not going to throw that completely out the window, and knowing what's coming, as well as some observation, resorting to your journal, knowing the time of the year, knowing your microclimate, all these other things, and you really can set yourself up for an enjoyable time in nature, because you don't have to worry about having to, you didn't wear the right hat because of the wind, or there's too much sun and you didn't cover yourself up, and you're going to be out, in that specific landscape in an area where sun could be a safety problem, right? So things like that. It's by tapping into this primal self, we have these levels of awareness come online, and we can use them together, and it makes sense to us. Because honestly, these are skills that we have forgotten. We have no need to do this in a world where you just have to click a button on your phone, and that's how most people are seeing, what the weather is doing. But again, I have big concerns, caution to just head down that rabbit hole and just forego yet another amazing human quality. One of these things that make us amazing as human beings is our ability to be one with nature. We are nature after all. So, I mean, to lose this, I think, is just a shame. And again, it's a great way to connect with nature, and kind of turn nature connection or nature interaction and immersion into somewhat of a game, if you will, and something that you can work at and see if it works for you, right? I mean, it works for me, and that's why I say I think it's just super important to harness these abilities and to share them, and to just see. I like to see how, what the types of things that I do, what type of results I get from them. So this is just another area I get to practice that. So if there's one thing to take away from all that, it would be to just follow your gut, Ask the question, quiet the mind, and you'll know what's coming. And again, that applies to more things than the weather. But if you're looking for practical things to know beyond exploring the realms of our psyche, weather folklore, it has always been a big part of the farmer's almanac. And long before, there were scientific instruments to measure and predict the weather, people used the instrument they had, which is the power of observation, which I love because this is like citizen scientist type stuff. And this is, I think, the most powerful way to conduct science is in the hands of the citizens, of the people. Anyways, my initial knowledge on weather, I would say, came from, all the old farmers' phrases, and we'll touch on them in a minute. But again, without scientific tools, our best ways to predict the weather really is through our observation, our regular mindful attention to the weather when we are in nature. Now, I just mentioned that putting your hand out the window or out the door or stepping outside and just quieting your mind and listening for a minute is way better than looking at an app and saying, what's the weather going to be like outside? Now, I know if it's cold weather climates, wintertime, you probably don't want to just go outside and do that. But that it truly is the best way to kind of climatize yourself, acclimate and see what exactly it is like out. What does it feel like? That's the best way. I'd say stop using the app to see what it is like out in the moment. You can do that by going outside. But to predict, the weather, you're going to want to know your local weather patterns. That's the most important. Knowing your local weather is, number one. Some areas have microclimates where they may have, rain every day at a certain time. I'm thinking of when I traveled to places like Costa Rica or Peru. This happens because of mountains and rainforests. Florida is another place. I know this is also a case where, it might rain for an hour of the day every day. So it's difficult, right now I'm thinking it's difficult for me to learn the weather up where I'm currently living up north or where I'm, moving to, because it's almost, considered mountain elevation. I think I'm at like 420 meters above sea level, 500 being considered mountain range, right? So it is the highlands, and it is very difficult to, predict the weather when I'm used to flat, open, can see what's coming for, for miles, right? So I'd say a great way to get to know your local weather patterns, and something I'm looking forward to doing when I'm up on my land more regularly, is to, have a sit spot. And again, a sit spot is, for anyone who doesn't know, a place in nature you go to on a regular basis to develop a relationship with that place and the natural elements around you, and that local ecology. It's a sit spot's kind of like a meditation, but with your eyes open, and you're using all the senses with a fascination for the natural environment around you, right? So you're being fascinated with what's around you, and again, you're developing a sense of presence on that landscape, and ultimately, you're cultivating relationship with nature. Many stress reduction benefits, and just about anything you want from that experience. It's an opportunity for reflection, an opportunity to just be, to learn about local plants and wildlife, learn about the seasons, see how water drains, all sorts of things you can essentially, gain from this experience. So a sit spot being a great way to learn your local weather patterns. On top of that would be to keep a weather journal or a weather diary. So by having that daily sit spot, we can start to learn and observe our local weather patterns, but then we start to take notes, and we start to compare what we observe, to what the meteorologists or the app, what they got wrong or what they're saying, and we can compare our notes year after year, and start to see what certain patterns are. And I think I remember on the farm growing up as a kid, this was my grandma's task. This was her. She would keep this journal on the coffee table in the living room, and she would keep this notebook for a notebook for each year, and she could compare for herself from year to year. I think she was an originator of many of the old wives' tales, um, that we'll touch on here in a little bit. But yeah, I think she really, when it comes to the weather, she had this down, and that was just because it was a practice that was done every day. So again, with the sit spot, this journal, things that we hope, things are great practices to do in nature, anyways. Just yeah, putting down the temperature and what your overall, just jot down your observations, the temperature, the prevailing weather for that day. Something you could do at the end of the day and say, what was the day like, what it felt like to you, right? When the clouds broke open or when the rain came, and that's another way to kind of harness this intuition. What was those intuitive hits that I was getting before the weather? Did I hear the voice say that it's going to rain? Put your roof up or whatever, right? So, yeah, like I think that by jotting down these observations, you basically have a barometer marking down, as to what is happening. You have your own internal barometer, right? And I'd say, yeah, if you have an actual barometer, also, marking down what that says and checking that and how you feel as the pressures rising or falling, right? If you have a rain gauge, check that as well. How much rain did you get? You could also look at your app and just record what's there. But again, we know that a lot of times that's wrong, and it'd be better for you to see what it's like in your neck of the woods. So there's all sorts of other gauges and gadgets you can get to, observe the wind in your area. And yeah, you could just record what the weather person's saying. But I highly urge everyone, this is an opportunity to become your own scientist and at the same time sharpen your intuition. I would also say that, if you're a gardener, I'm just thinking the importance of this becomes greater, as you'll get to understand how soil drains during certain times of the years and with various levels of precipitation. So different levels of depth, I think, that you could go into based on what you're looking to get out of this practice and process. So one important thing that we're going to talk about here today is barometric pressure. So high pressure, in short, I guess I could say high pressure is that nice, sunny and clear weather, and low pressure is the cloudy and rainy, however, often warmer end of that spectrum. So high pressure, and again, understanding the difference here and tools we can use like a barometer are going to play a big role, I think, in helping us understand this and helping us understand what changing pressure feels like in our bodies. So high pressure days, we naturally want to be outside and moving, and low pressure days are the days we might feel like staying inside or lounging around. So simply by, if you know your body well enough and you, let's say, feel like you don't know nature that well, if you know your body and you know that you don't feel like doing much that day, just take a look at a barometer or look at what the pressure is doing, where if it's changing more so. If it's going to that lower pressure, it's a good chance that like right in those times or leading in and around those times, you're feeling like you don't want to necessarily move around or be outside. And animals are like that as well, right? So we'll talk here in a minute about different, animal sign that can help us here. And actually, before we go any further, I'm just thinking about achy joints, right? Everyone knows someone potentially who says, oh, they can predict when a storm is coming because of a achy or sore joint. And I mean, I would say this is heavily debated in the world of science. Some people saying there's not enough there to support this. Others, and saying that it's anecdotal evidence supporting this. But as I'll explain barometric pressure in a minute, it does make sense in the sense of low pressure coming with rain and the weight of the air pushing down. So individuals with chronic inflammatory conditions or joint pain, arthritis, things like that, definitely can see a greater fluctuation. Now, I think even individuals who are removing inflammatory foods and trying, exercising and doing what they can to reduce inflammation, I'd say maybe it's a little more subtle, but it's definitely still there, and it's a tool, or it's something that we can use, of course, to help us predict the weather. So before we get into talking about pressure, I would say get a good barometer. I remember growing up, my dad has this very nice barometer on the wall. It's almost like kind of like grandfather clock-esque type, beautiful piece of, really art in the home, but it serves a purpose. And I always remember my dad going up to the wall and tapping the wall and, setting the barometer and seeing where the pressure would be going. And again, my dad, other than having hobby farm or a small garden at that time anyways, really had no, need to know what the weather was doing other than he was interested in it. So I grew up around this. And I mean, if you don't know what a barometer is, it's essentially a scientific instrument. It's used to measure atmospheric pressure, or barometric pressure, as it's called. So the atmosphere, has layers of air that are wrapped around the earth, and that air essentially has a weight, and it presses against everything it touches, and as gravity pulls that to the earth. So a barometer will essentially measure this pressure. And so how it predicts the weather essentially is by, if a barometer has a high reading, it means that there's high pressure. And if it's stable, it indicates good weather, right? So if it's not changing, so if you set it at a point and it's staying there, it's not changing, we have good weather in those high pressure times. A barometer that's falling, however, that would indicate that a low pressure system is moving in, and you can ideally expect poor weather. So you ideally use a barometer. It's widely used, basically, like I said, to measure atmospheric pressure, and it's one of the basic tools I think you can get, other than having obviously a thermometer, right? And again, I mentioned it having like two hands, and one is that measuring hand, and the other is a movable pointer that you can adjust, essentially. And by doing that, you're setting it, and then you're tapping the wall to get an accurate reading. It will adjust, and from there you can measure the pressure. So if it's a sunny day, and let's just say, for examples here, there's a lot of wind. Well, wind is an indicator that there's a temperature change coming. So there's warm air or cold air moving in somewhere, and that is forcing it's forcing the environment basically to create wind. So also in a mountain environment, I'm thinking, looking at, say, like cloud patterns, this will help you know what's coming in. So for example, seeing like long, wispy or thin clouds, these they're known as mare's tails, right? So thinking of a horse's tail. So you kind of see like big clouds and then these like tails coming off them sometimes. And they almost look like kind of like jet, how jets leave that mark in the sky after they dissipate. And no, I'm not talking about chemtrails again. But when you see these mare's tails, this means you're at the edge of a front, and there is high altitude wind trading place. And your weather, this normally indicates that your weather will be changing in the next 24, 36 hours or so. So let's say you're out camping and you want to know what type of pressure you're dealing with. Well, you don't have your barometer there with you, obviously. You can look at your campfire. If the smoke of your campfire is going straight up and above the fire, you have high pressure. If the smoke is staying low and like blown around you, or you're getting hit in the face with it, you have low pressure. So it's almost, think of like a ceiling fan that's pushing the smoke back down at a certain point. Once it rises, that would indicate low pressure. So knowing what the pressure is doing is possible. Also, I'm thinking, when you're near trees or in a forest, I grew up with this as my indicator, having a forest in my backyard. If you look at the leaves of deciduous trees, like say maples, poplars, I had a bunch of poplars and oaks, and often they would be turned upward before a heavy rain. So the leaves are actually reacting to the increase in humidity that usually, precedes a storm with that low pressure. So leaves with soft stems specifically, they become limp essentially in response to that abrupt change in humidity, and that, basically allows the wind to flip them over. So also birds will fly lower during these times with low pressure. So birds are very sensitive to the pressure. Another indicator of low pressure, or that rain might be coming, is by looking at insects. If it's a high pressure day, the bugs really won't be bothering you. They'll be out happy, doing their thing just like you are. On those low pressure days, however, bugs like black flies and mosquitoes, they get a little hangry, if you will, and you'll notice their biting activity pick up just before a rain. So again, that low pressure kind of carries that moist air where these types of insects venture out from the ponds and standing waters. They do most of their biting and feeding at, and this is when they'll travel out. So you'll just paying attention to that right there will tell you a change is coming or rain's on the way, and that's that sign obviously being kind of right before a rain. I think really something I've noticed as being a good indicator. Another way to use insects to determine if a storm is coming is by looking at a beehive. If you have bees, if they're swarming near the hive, it means they're basically looking to get indoors and out of the rain. So if you notice fresh, I think other insects here now, if you notice like fresh walls or cones around ant hills, it means they're protecting their nest from a rain that's coming. So again, looking at ant hills is another way to predict what's happening with the pressure. Now, another area outside of pressure, I think pressure being the main thing to kind of get a sense of in our bodies, get a sense of by looking at these tools and learning pressure and changes. Observing changes in nature is a great way to connect and interact with nature. And again, as a reflective process also in our life, and just kind of, taking questions to nature and asking questions and seeing what arises, using nature as a mirror, obviously being a great practice to, reduce stress and whatnot, give meaning in life. And so anyways, I think, getting used to pressures through a sit spot, through observation, through journaling, and through that felt awareness or intuition is a great idea. Predicting winter weather and even just winter survival is something that, we haven't really touched on much here on the podcast. But I think when it comes to predicting winter weather, there are some, interesting old wise tales and other things I think would be fun to go over. And I mean, I think predicting weather in the winter, it has a certain draw to it because obviously traveling potentially becoming more dangerous during the season. In fact, we could do a whole podcast on just that winter survival topic. But regardless, it's good to know what, weather or maybe predicting how hard a winter might be coming up. I know I've been spoofing on the weather people, but they're still relevant. And I think, especially in the winter time, right? Checking to see what the forecast is doing before you head onto the roads. That's an important thing. But one thing, like, let's get into practical things for winter, and even like, how can you tell if a winter storm is going to be a bad one? I find if you look at the size of the snowflakes, that's helpful. If the roads have been cleared of snow, and you are wondering what the drive will be like once snow starts to fall, you can tell whether or not you're going to need to get the snow shovel out or the snow plows are going to need to hit the road. If you're looking at larger snowflakes falling, that often means there will not be a lot of snow accumulation. Small snowflakes, however, on the other hand, normally mean that a good amount will accumulate. Now, that's not a hard, fast rule. It's something I've noticed. Another thing about, again, predicting what type of winter is coming, I've heard, if you're into collecting acorns, then you may know that when the shells of acorns are thicker, a harsher or colder winter is on its way. Same rule goes for, say, corn husks, when corn husks are thicker. But a proverb or old wives' tale that I feel like I've debunked, is that pine cone on a tree can determine a bad winter period. Recently we had this happen the past year, tons of pine cones, everyone was saying it, and then the winter wasn't that bad, right? So I've heard that pine cones take 3 years to grow, so it's more so about them experiencing good growing conditions than it is about them predicting the winter. So, I can't say predicting how bad a winter is going to be is something that I know how to do at this point in my life. But again, through accessing our primal self, and I think this is something that is possible. I just can't say it's something I've been able to dabble into or have had much success in predicting. Now, I want to close today's podcast with some of those common phrases that are legit. Well, they're more like rules. They're not really laws, but I feel like there's something worth knowing. And I got a few of them here that I'm going to say to wrap up today's podcast. And that one is that we've all heard it: red skies at night, sailors delight; red skies at morning, sailors take warning. That can also be used interchangeably with the word campers instead of sailors. And, we all love a beautiful sunrise or sunset because of the way the sun's rays illuminate the underside of the clouds. And that essentially causes them to look red, orange, or pink. So if the sky is red in the morning, it means there's clouds that are coming in from the west, essentially, and, could possibly, underlining possibly, bring bad weather. On the other hand, red sunset at night means clear skies are on the way. So there is a little bit of truth to that. I mean, I've used that one, and I'd say, yes, definitely something to remember. The other one, frog croaking in lagoon means rain is coming soon. This one for sure works. So if you have bodies of water around, listening to the frogs and knowing when they're going off is something to pay attention to. Frogs are cold-blooded, and they require relatively high temperatures to be active, right? So they also like water, right? And need to have moist skin. So when there is humidity along with higher temperatures, they tend to get rather excited and become vocal. Of course, that high humidity is also a sign that rain is coming. So pretty good indicator with the frogs. The last one I'm going to touch on is dew in the grass, no rain shall come to pass. So this one also works, in my opinion. Dew forms basically when a surface cools during a clear night. Clear nights, again, high pressure, often have that cool air at nighttime when things cool off in the daytime. So this will often mean that you have, a clear, high pressure day coming on the way as well. So I would say, from my experience growing up, knowing this one to be pretty accurate, getting out there in the farm fields early in the morning, and if there's a lot of dew on the bushes, on the berry bushes, on the grass, then yeah, there's likely going to be a clear high day or a high pressure day. Well, folks, that will do it for today. Thanks so much for listening. If there's anything you want to add to today's podcast, or if there's anything that you feel like I could have, I got wrong with these old wives' tales, or if something you want to add again, let me know at the show notes. I'll put it out in the newsletter as an appendix to this episode, because I think there's so many people out there that have probably more experience with, truly intuitively feeling the weather and predicting the weather. So I hope today's podcast gives you guys some tools. I know, I'm thinking of my upbringing around, in the farm and that, and my grandma inventing these old wives' tales. I think that these, it's something I have a little bit of experience with. And again, tapping into whether it is observing, through sit spot, through journaling the weather, or whether it is through intuitively kind of feeling the weather and knowing what these pressure changes feel like in our body and how that represents in us. There's a lot of fun practice here. And so if you're interested in learning more about these realms of the self and learning how to connect with nature in this way, also please let me know. Email me, Shawn@rewildmybio.com. Again, I'd be really interested in knowing what types of things listeners are into learning. So when it comes to me crafting up these workshops here, I'm doing something that you, the listener, want to experience and learn. So thank you, everyone out there, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this with a friend. And of course, stay wild. Thanks for listening to this episode of ReWild My Bio. Please leave a rating and review, as this helps others find the show and helps me make the show better. Thanks to today's sponsors, and thank you to the listeners who support the show through using the discount codes and, of course, sharing the podcast with their friends. If you want more nature connection and rewilding content, please sign up for my newsletter by visiting www.rewildmybio.com or follow me on social media. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay wild.